I want them held accountable for what they did. It's not right. I didn't do anything wrong, and they're openly lying about things that didn't occur. So in the end of all this, besides trying to defend myself in the legal system, there will be an aspect to this where the Calgary police are held accountable, and there will be an offensive aspect to my case for sure.
Adam Soos here for Rebel News with an update on some of the arrests that took place at the protest last Saturday. Now, for those of you unfamiliar with the situation, for nearly 2 years, protesters have been gathering opposing vaccine mandates and COVID-19 restrictions. Largely without incident, these have been entirely peaceful protests until a few weeks ago, counter-protesters began to show up. And the following weekend after those counter-protesters first showed up, we actually saw smoke bombs going off and police interactions with those counter-protesters. The following week, Mayor Jyoti Gondek suggested that those protesters have every right to counter-protest, but the people marching for their freedoms, the people marching against these mandates, they have no right to go into those communities and to interrupt things. Jyoti Gondek doesn't seem to realize that she doesn't get to decide who protests and who doesn't, and she also doesn't get to say that one group of protesters who in fact were not obeying the commands of police officers are within their rights, and another group who is obeying the will of the police and the orders of the police and how to proceed peacefully. She doesn't get to say that that group is not allowed. That's not how it works. Well, needless to say, after she made those comments, we saw dramatic escalation, more and more counter-protesters showing up, and the city even sought an injunction attempting to make these protests illegal. This categorically led to escalated enforcement from police, and over that weekend we saw numerous arrests, interactions, even fights breaking out, all because of ultimately the police enforcement and the words of Mayor Jyoti Gondek. We're going to be speaking in just a moment with one individual who was simply having a conversation with police and then faced a dramatic arrest to get his side of the story and his perspective on what happened. So as I mentioned, I'm now joined by Devlin Gannon, the young man who was arrested for daring to attend the protest. I guess first off, you were attending somewhat in your capacity as an independent journalist, just covering the event.
Yeah.
I'm not there to cause problems. Correct me if I'm wrong, but I think you've been attending these protests effectively without incident for almost 2 years. Is that right?
Yeah, I've been there since the very get-go with a camera and with the intention of just documenting what's going on and, shedding light on the point of view that's not really shared in the mainstream media everywhere.
So then what exactly, lead us for the people, we've got some footage and we'll be certain to share that as well, but lead us through exactly what happened and how it got to the point you were pinned on the ground shirtless, the dramatic arrest that we saw.
Right. Well, I mean, in comparison to other protests, like you said, it's been going on for a long time. So the day started out kind of normal. We went to Central Memorial, but with the injunction that had been put forward by the court literally the night before, there was no amplified noise devices. There was all sorts of different things that were essentially hoops to jump through in order to even be allowed in the park. And don't get me wrong, those hoops were all jumped through. There was no amplification devices. There was nothing of the sort in that injunction being broken. But because of the fact that there couldn't be amplification, the rally itself and the thousands of people peacefully marched towards City Hall, and this was a way different march than before. We've seen the police shut down the roads and escort us and take us there, where this time we were peacefully, law-abidingly walking on the sidewalks using the cross lights, and we made our way to City Hall. We did our rally there. We had a speaker system, business as normal, and since so many people had parked by Central Memorial Park, everybody, once it ended, walked back there, lawfully, peacefully, following the stoplights and the traffic signals. And once we got back to the park, there was quite a large police presence there, and they just essentially started trying to push everybody out of the park, no matter what, no matter who you were, no matter your demographic. Every age, race, and profession was probably pushed or told to leave by the police that day, and we were there peacefully. And not to mention...
And so just quickly to confirm then, at this point, this was no longer the organized protest.
Yeah.
This was just people making their way out, hanging out in a park. Is that right?
Exactly. The protest had ended entirely at City Hall, and we all just congregated legally, following the roads and traffic laws, back to Central Memorial. And since we were there, the police kind of created a line and were just proceeding across the park, pushing people away. And there was an agitating group of around 5 to maybe 10 individuals there that the police had successfully already kind of quarantined away from anybody else. And so
And were those protesters or counter-protesters?
those would have been counter protesters, like masked up, flags that didn't relate to us in any way with racist things and such. Anyways, long story short, they were already quarantined away from everybody, but the police were proceeding to just continue pushing anybody out of the park. And so at that point, I was there recording. I wanted to document what was happening. I had been looking for people to interview prior to that, and I noticed what's going on. And I see Deputy Chief Chad Toffick of the Calgary Police, who was there on scene. And I was familiar with who he was, so I approached him, started speaking with him and asking, like, why are you moving us out of the park? We're all peaceful here. And he told us that we were in breach of the injunction, which I then said, like, no, we aren't. Like, what part of it? And he said to me that we weren't allowed to be in groups of more than 50, which, again, like, I have audio of this and video, and that's not a part of the injunction at all. And then on top of that, he just said, you can't be in this park, which that is the park that the chief of police specifically said, like, if there's gonna be a protest, Central Memorial Park is the place you're allowed to go. And he came out even after the injunction and specified that. So again, like, he's saying you can't be in the park that the chief of police told us to be in. And so at that point, things kind of just really escalated. I was being pushed and shoved the whole time having a conversation with him. And I mean, he's talking back to me. And then the police kind of just really escalated from there. My collar gets grabbed and I'm asking what did I do? What's happening? Nobody's telling me I'm being arrested or detained. And I get stripped, my sweater comes off, and within the span of like 10 seconds, there's like a group of 5 to 8 officers just dogpiling me, taking me to the ground, and saying stop resisting, as, you know, one officer is taking my arm behind my back, but the other one's trying to take the same arm upwards, and the other one's trying to go another way, and like, I'm a rag doll. Any resistance they feel is another officer.
Ligaments.
Yeah, and it's like, I'm just sitting there, I'm being ragdolled around, and then I hear, use the taser, and at this point, I'm being chokeholded too. And so I use whatever I can to say, I'm not resisting, like, I try and get it out. And so you can hear me say it, and then boom, tasered right in the back. 8 of them pinning me to the ground already at this point. So yeah, and just from there, handcuffs, sat on my butt for 10, 12 minutes while they pushed me to pretty much like a folded in half position on the ground. And then, yeah, I was held in the Remand for nearly 24 hours, like 10 minutes shy of 24 hours in the Remand. And now I'm facing the charges of obstruction of the injunction and then assault of a police officer.
And so can you talk about that? And you're going to share footage. We've got lots of footage. What exactly are they implying? Because from what I saw, there didn't look to be any assault of a police officer. What are they saying you did?
Well, I mean, in the court, in the bail hearing, it was read out specifically like the statement from the officer that's saying I assaulted him, and they're saying that I aggressively pushed the officer backwards and he fell backwards. And there is footage showing this officer falling backwards quite clearly, but as well, just as clearly, you can see me restrained by 4 other officers, and another individual, entirely not me, has stepped in between me and this officer and kind of bumped into him, and he falls to the ground. And so not me at all, no contact from me at all, and they're claiming I aggressively pushed him to the ground.
It's incredibly shocking because you, like we said, have been attending these protests like almost everybody else until a couple weeks ago when counter-protesters showed up.
Right.
No incidents. You haven't had problems with the police before. You know them. You were talking with them,
Yeah.
having a conversation. Suddenly, seemingly at the behest of Mayor G.O.T. Gondek, thinking that protests are okay as long as they're not this protest, as long as it isn't this opinion. After that, we knew immediately there would be escalation, and you experienced this dramatic arrest. Ultimately, I just want to ask, what does it feel like to have a mayor, an elected representative who's supposed to be allowing you to have these freedoms, allowing you to protest, allowing you to have your voice heard, ultimately using the police as an arm of enforcement for political ideology?
Yeah. Well, I mean, to put it in one word, I feel betrayed. Like, really betrayed. It's the city that I've been born and raised in, and like, not just this city, but all of our entire country has the right to gather, the right to protest peacefully. And beyond that, I'm there covering these things and trying to document them and show what's happening there. So I'm not just there to peacefully protest. I'm there to document this as an independent journalist. And I was assaulted. And so, to be honest, she's been demonizing these things for a while. She's been trying to say that they're not right, they're not a protest, they're a parade, and we don't have any grounds to stand on. And like we do. There are mandates that, like travel mandates. I can't leave this country. I'm 26 and I can't travel, and I wanted to travel. Most people do. And so there are things we're standing behind. And besides mandates, government overreach, and the people who've been doing this for the last 3 years, they can't just go hide in the shadows now that these mandates are being rescinded in certain ways, because they'll do it again and they will jump on any opportunity to do it again. So we need to hold them accountable. And when on the topic of accountability, that's what I aim for with these police, because I want them held accountable for what they did. It's not right. I didn't do anything wrong, and they're openly lying about things that didn't occur. So in the end of all this, besides trying to defend myself in the legal system, there will be an aspect to this where the Calgary police are held accountable, and there will be an offensive aspect to my case for sure.
Yeah, and it is good to hear people are finally taking a stand in the courts, standing up for their freedom, standing up for their rights. This may be difficult for people like Justin Trudeau or Mayor Jyoti Gondek to hear, but they don't get to determine whose protests are valid or not. That's not their say. What we do have is the Canadian Charter of Rights and Freedoms and the Criminal Code that says you have those fundamental rights. I'm so sorry that this happened to you. I'm sorry what you went through. It was certainly dramatic. I'm sorry for any vilification that you've endured. We're happy to be here to share your story, share your perspective, and do keep us posted. I know you have a lawyer and you're going to be fighting back, so let us know what happens with your case, and we'll be certainly there to tell the other side of the story while people out there are vilifying you. Any final words for folks out there?
Honestly, I really do appreciate the chance to share my side of the story, and I mean, judge the footage for yourself. You can see what happened. They'll definitely show you that. And the last thing I could have to say is, going forward, like, if you do want to know what's happening with this case, you can always help with the legal defense funds and the crowdsourcing that we're doing. Devlin Legal Fund at protonmail.com, and that's where any donations are going straight into my lawyer's public trust account, so that we can not only defend the criminal charges but also move forward with other things in the system. So you guys are great, and I seriously appreciate the opportunity.
Thanks so much, Devlin. Really appreciate it, and we hope everyone out there enjoys this report. Thanks so much for tuning in. For Rebel News, I'm Adam Soos. Canadians have a right to have their opinions heard, both on the streets and within the courts. That's why we started FightVaccinePassports.com. It's our legal challenge through the Democracy Fund against un-Canadian and undemocratic vaccine mandates and COVID-19 restrictions. If you want to receive a tax receipt for your contribution to the fight against vaccine passports, go to FightVaccinePassports.com.